Hello, dear friends, and welcome. Welcome to the Waystone. This is a free public live stream that is being hosted by my Patreon community, which we on the inside like to call the Waystone. So you're very welcome. Those of you who are not regular participants, you're very welcome today. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to talk to all of you today. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions. So the live chat is open. Please ask away. Send me angry rants, send me thoughts, send me questions. I'm happy to answer them, and I will answer them as we go. But as oftentimes these kinds of Q&A type situations happen, it's better for me to talk while you guys ask your questions instead of just standing and staring at the camera and waiting for people to put things into the chat. Sometimes it can get a little bit tense. So I thought this might be a really nice opportunity since it's coming to the end of the year. And for myself, I just had my 40th birthday a few days ago, a very eventful birthday, which we spent in the ER, but perhaps that's a story for later. It's a good time for me and an appropriate and kind of natural time for me to look back and think a little bit about what has happened over the past year and what's going to happen over the next calendar year in 2024. Because there's a lot of things that I'm planning on doing, and they're all for you lovely people. So here's where I secretly, what's going on here is I'm just actually doing a retrospective for myself. So I actually remember what it was that I've been doing. And so I actually plan properly. But don't tell anybody, that's a secret. This past year was a very interesting year. It was, I'm sure all of you have had your share of ups and downs, but like often with me, there have been some spectacular highs and some really spectacular lows. But in terms of the writing life, I came into 2023 for the first time thinking of myself as, and not just thinking of myself, but really being someone seriously taking the reality of being a creative professional as something that's not merely a side hustle. So at the beginning of the year, I could honestly say that this thing that I do, the writing, the teaching, the Patreon, the fairy tales, the live speaking, was something that was becoming very important to me. And in the context, and it was happening in the context of something fairly interesting that I think a lot of you who follow me will agree with, and that's the very curious, fecund, and interesting phenomenon of the new storytellers who are starting to leave their mark on the world. And in particular, I mean people like Paul Kingsnorth and Jonathan Pageau, with both of whom have been colleagues of mine now for more than a year, and with both of whom I've had some pretty amazing experiences. Though neither of whom I have yet met in person, which hopefully will happen in 2024. It was in the context of taking Paul Kingsnorth's wonderful course, Rewilding Your Words, that I reconnected with the sense of place in a way that then Martin Shaw deepened for me later on. I'll talk about that in a minute, but made me very aware and pleased with the fact that the place that I live, this place we call Cow Country, is remarkably deep, both in its natural beauties and also with its connection with the old history of the United States, and with the old history of the Russian Church in America. Me having the wonderful opportunity of being a tradition carrier, musically speaking, for the Jordanville Seminary Choir. It's something that I take very seriously and something that I love to do very much. So in the context of all that, I came into 2023 thinking that, okay, this is going to be a year when I really focus on being fruitful. Nature, I was really thinking a lot about mushrooms and about how the fruiting bodies of mushrooms, the mycelia, not the fruiting body, but the mycelia of mushrooms, have this incredible way of intertwining the various ecosystems of a forest and feeding it all together and make it into a single living organism, something that then came out creatively in the character of Dunai in my novella, The Son of the Deathless, which many of you have already read. And so that was the context in which I thought, okay, this is going to be a year that is very, very fruitful. And I'm going to really focus in on that. And so what does that mean? What did that mean practically? Well, what that meant was that I started out the year with a bang. Jonathan Pageau and I worked together on setting up his new publishing company, Symbolic World Press, and in particular on really focusing in and preparing the work for what became a fantastic, spectacular success, which was the Kickstarter for his special edition illustrated retelling of the Snow White fairy tale. And I'm sure many of you have contributed to that. I'm very happy to say that it looks like we're going to be getting our copies of that book very soon. Those of us who signed up for that Kickstarter. That was a very wonderful opportunity to work with Jonathan on a project that I felt very strongly about. It was wonderful to be at the beginning of it, at the at the moment when Jonathan had the idea for the extended universe, so to speak, of the fairy tales that is now unfolding as part of Symbolic World Press in a series of Kickstarters that are going to be going for the next several years. Beautifully illustrated by some of the best illustrators out there right now, and are directed by Heather Pollington, who's seriously one of the most professional and wonderful people I've ever worked with. So that was a real pleasure. There's a theme here, though. What ended up happening was that working with Jonathan is a full-time job. Jonathan is fantastically talented, and he's very full of ideas. And I didn't have a full-time slot to be able to give to his publishing company. So I helped move him along to somebody who would be able to give him a full-time attention and become the head of publishing. And that's Melissa Laro, who has now taken over and is doing a fantastic job as the publishing director of Symbolic World Press. And I'm continuing to work with Jonathan on a project-by-project basis, depending on what comes up in his mind and what fits our mutual interests and desires. Father David says, I thought you and Jonathan were both at John Here's event. Jonathan was supposed to be there. He had a family emergency which prevented him from coming. So the first time we were supposed to be in the same geographical area, it didn't work out. But early 2024, hope, God willing, everything will happen the way it's supposed to, and I will be at Symbolic World Summit, speaking about hospitality and giving and telling fairy tales in the process. So that hopefully will be a place, perhaps a more fitting place for us to meet in person. In addition to having this very rich experience of fairy tale creation with Jonathan, but as somebody who was a facilitator, not a creator myself, I also had a wonderful experience meeting and having a little bit of an encounter with Martin Shaw. Martin Shaw, for those of you who don't know, is probably the preeminent storyteller of our time, someone who has received the gift of oral storytelling as a kind of oral tradition from other people who have had oral bardic traditions passed on to them in the old-fashioned way that they used to be done way back, thousands of years ago. And as such, somebody who is very different from very many other storytellers living today. His storytelling style is very powerful. It's something that even before I met him, I was very struck by. So when I had an opportunity to host him over here in the Waystone on my Patreon channel, it was a rare delight to have him there to speak about the art and the practice and the tradition of storytelling. In light of that, I was so inspired by the whole encounter. I asked him to help me out with my own storytelling podcast in a certain kingdom, as it was then. And working with him and hearing his critique of my style, it became clear to me that I had been doing fairy tales in a way that I'm sure you all can hear the screaming going on over there. Yes, what can I say? This has been an interesting week for the lovely children, but never mind. We love them. We love them very much. So the way I had been telling stories for Ancient Faith in the Certain Kingdom podcast was not at all in the traditional way the stories are told. Mine was a simple translation of the editions of the stories that were themselves compiled, not by storytellers, but by compilers. And if any of you listened to my conversation with Vegan Goroyan, which happened earlier this year in February, you will know that is not always the best way of approaching the stories. Although I think Vegan would be more okay with the 19th century canon as being somewhat of a proper distillation of how the stories must be, at least for the European world of fairy tales. I'm not sure that's the case for the Russian fairy tales. There is something to be said about the Russian fairy tale world needing to be a lot more immediate, a lot more chaotic, perhaps than the received tradition of the fairy tales from Europe. And that's something that I've been exploring. Those of you who are in the Waystone, members of my Patreon community, know that I've been trying this new approach of telling the stories as they come through me without reading them from a pre-prepared script. Something interesting has happened. The first time I did it, it was a flaming disaster. The more I do it, the easier it gets. But the more I notice that the medium of telling stories live, even if it's to a live audience on the internet, is very different than reading the stories to a soundtrack, as I did in a certain kingdom. So I'll get to where we go with that. But it's been a very interesting exploration for me to figure out how best to relate to the stories, how to read them. And it's reawakened for me a realization of their importance, of the fairy tale's importance in my own formation as a human being and as a writer, and also the importance of me passing those fairy tales on to my children, which you might be surprised I haven't been doing as much as I should. So we've recently moved to a new house that has a fireplace, and we've instituted an almost nightly ritual of us sitting in front of the fire in the evening before we go to bed, and me reading to them from the fairy tale canon in Russian. So that's something that I'm very grateful for. I'm very excited about, and it's going to have its fruits coming up in 2024, which I'll get to later. I also was very, I think there might be some questions here, so I'll go to the chat. Seraphim says he's looking forward to seeing if his press will eventually open to submissions. Right now, it seems that they're looking for possible project ideas that might also interest Mr. Pageau. Seraphim, I don't have a direct answer to that, but my instinct, and this is only my thought, I don't have insider knowledge on this, but my sense is that Symbolic World Press, at least in its initial form, and the initial form will be, I think, the first 5 to 10 years, at least 5. I don't think there's going to be an opportunity for submissions to Symbolic World Press, at least in the first few years. The reason is that he has rolling Kickstarters for projects that he is writing himself that take up a lot of time of the publishing team. So the only way that this could happen is if the next few Kickstarters become so successful that Symbolic World Press is then able to get enough extra buffer income from those Kickstarters to be able to then hire a acquisitions editor. They're not at that stage. Again, I'm no longer employed by Jonathan as an employee of Symbolic World Press. So I don't have insider knowledge, but that is my instinct. But Seraphim, hold on. I have some news about publishing imprints that you might find interesting in a very short period of time. Nico, good to see you. Hello, Argentina. Ian says, hey, I just want to say thanks for having introduced me to Russian fairy tales through In a Certain Kingdom. I also wanted to ask what you thought of Anna Karenina, especially the character of Levin. I haven't read Anna Karenina in a very long time. But I do remember that my first reading of it got better as I went through it. I don't like Anna Karenina as a character, but you're not supposed to. I think the story of Kitty and Levin is a very beautiful one. I wonder though, if I reread it now, if I might not like it a little bit less, just because the older I get, the more I appreciate Dostoevsky's insights into human nature, the more I think that Tolstoy's insights were too utopian to be realistic. But it's a good question, Ian. I'll have to go back and reread the novel. I think it's one of the best novels ever written. Full stop. I think it's a better novel than War and Peace, just in terms of its value as a work of literature. I enjoyed War and Peace a lot more. I think what he did in War and Peace is remarkable. Don't read the conclusion; just cut it out. The epilogue of War and Peace. It's really dumb. I hate it. I was also in the context of Jonathan and Martin Shaw. I can't fail to talk about Paul Kingsnorth, and many of you have been regular readers of his fantastic Substack, The Abbey of Misrule, which has been going for several years now, and now has changed a bit of its focal point away from talking against the machine and more towards a positive vision of what a rooted traditional life might look like, which is great. Angeline, I'm getting to the imprints. Just give me a second. Seraphim said, I suspect that might be the case. I just want to see an Orthodox ish, publishing venue, short stories, novellas, serial fiction, the lot, one day, God willing. All right, guys, let me get to it. I'll get to it. I have a script I have to follow. All right. So Paul Kingsnorth has been a wonderful inspiration to me. Personally, he's been a wonderful addition to St. Basil's. In fact, he's the cornerstone. Let's be honest, of St. Basil's St. Basil Writers Workshop, which, by the way, is going to be opening its doors for registration in about a month. So those of you who are writers and are interested, start preparing your submissions. He's just a fantastically brilliant man whose insights and whose manner of writing those insights is so perfect for this moment. And also, just it happened that he was writing about all this stuff just as this bizarre AI explosion started to happen in 2023. And the speed of the growth of the large language models, and also the way that society is reacting to it, is truly remarkable. I think it's one of the most interesting and potentially disturbing phenomena of the last 5-10 years. I think it's far more interesting than the pandemic. But in light of all that, I happened upon the thought and the writing of John Vervaeke concerning AI. Now, John has been getting a lot of both plaudits and criticism from various people about his video essay on what he believes are the potential growth points of AI in the near and far future. For myself, and those of you who don't know about this essay, just look it up. You can just look it up on YouTube. John Vervaeke AI. It's all over the place. You'll find it. I found his thought process to be unlikely in terms of actual historical reality. Like, I don't think that there are going to be what do you call them, silicon sages walking around giving us better versions of the gospel. But all that he said made my writer's brain go nuts, because there are some writers that I love, like Gene Wolfe, that love the ambiguity of the interplay between the theological and the technological, the transhumanist and the Christian. I think that's just fodder for a ton of stories, and it really exploded my brain, and it provided for the only real opportunity for me to write fresh and new words, fiction words, in 2023. I didn't publish a new book in 2023, unfortunately. Shame on me, but I'll get to some of the reasons why that didn't happen. What I did manage to do is actually write a fair number of new words that are going to be a newly published novel in early 2024, the foundation of which took me a while to get through. There's a lot of stuff that needed to be researched, that needed to be thought through, that needed to be tinkered with, because this is a totally different genre, post-apocalyptic sci-fi, something like my conversation with Canticles of Leibowitz and C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength, interfused with Paul Kingsnorth's thoughts about the machine and John Vervaeke's musings about AI. It's all in there. And that's going to become Cantos of Arcadia, which is my first foray into sci-fi. Although, it's not really sci-fi in the proper 20th century version of it, because it's very theological, it's very philosophical, it's very much concerned with the kinds of things that fairy tales are concerned with. And yes, there are going to be some fairy tale elements to it, even though it's a sci-fi novel. So hopefully that's something you're all interested in pursuing, or at least interested in taking a peek at when it comes out early in 2024. Patristix asks, what is my recommended first book? Is that what it says? First read, yes, by Paul Kingsnorth. I think everybody should start from the beginning of The Abbey of Misrule. Just treat his Substack as a book. It's going to become a book eventually. Just this morning, I received an email as part of his newsletter that he has agreed to a publishing contract with an imprint of Penguin here in the US to create a book out of those essays. Now, that's going to take him some time, because, as those of you who have read the essays know, they're thematically connected, but they're kind of all over the place in terms of their order. So you wouldn't be able to just cut and paste all of those essays and make a book out of it. The book needs to be a lot more connected. The thoughts in them need to be kind of developed in a way that would make it more like a book and less like a series of essays. But I still say start with that. And if you want fiction, read his Buckmaster trilogy. Just do it, with the expectation that you're entering into a very weird and very interesting space. Start with The Wake. I would recommend reading The Wake in two formats. Get the paperback and get the audiobook and read them together. Read a little section in paperback, listen to the next section in audiobook. It helps understanding the language, because Paul made up a language and then wrote a story in it, which is insane. But yeah, very Tolkienian. Nick, it reminds you of 48K, Adeptus Mechanicus. Yeah, there's some influence of that, even though I don't really know that world at all. But talking to people who like those stories, yeah, there's a lot of similarities there. Post-apocalyptic sci-fi, says Father David. I suggest you take a look at Orion Shall Rise by Paul Anderson. He actually gives a nod to a Nicene Christianity. I will. I actually like Paul Anderson, so that's a good one. I'll definitely check that one out. Seraphim says, I'm guessing your publishing plan for your sci-fi will not be inspired by George Martin's or Patrick Rothfuss' example. No, no, I will not. It will not. What's the issue with Rothfuss, Angeline, is that he, nobody will say this out loud. I will. He's afraid of publishing book 3. He's not writing it because he's afraid. The issue with George R.R. Martin is different. George R.R. Martin has always taken forever to write his stories. The reason is that he apparently, and this is a bit of insider information, and I'm not sure if it's entirely valid, but apparently this is from people who know him personally. George Martin writes, he's a pantser. He writes into the dark, which means he doesn't have a proper outline. Think about that. If you are in book 6 of a series that has taken 30 years to write and you're not outlining, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to write sometimes several hundred pages worth of story that you're going to get to the end of, and you're going to realize none of this works. You're going to have to throw it out, which is what he's been doing, apparently. He's been writing a lot, but not publishable because it's not coming together yet. But those people who've been following George Martin know that this is actually how he writes. Like, this is his normal style. It takes 10 years for him to write a book. And the fact that people are complaining about it is more a function of the HBO show being popular than the book series being somehow longer coming out than before. The issue with Rothfuss is that I think, and again, no inside information, this is just what I think. I think that he was so successful with his first 2 books that he's afraid of finishing the third, because he doesn't actually have to finish the third. He's so financially set up through all the different things he does, licensing deals, etc. Like, he's doing well for himself. He doesn't need to write book 3. And unless there's a fire under your butt, and sometimes that fire is just the need to get the story out, it's sometimes easier to just sit on it and not do anything. Again, no insider information. That's just what I think. However, with the Cantos of Arcadia being the natural segue, Cantos of Arcadia, my first post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel, is not going to be published by Waystone Press, which is my publishing house that published all the books that I have written up to now. It's going to be published by a new publishing house, which we are calling Wood Between Worlds Press. Now, those of you who have read Chronicles of Narnia will know the reference. The Wood Between the Worlds is the nether place, the transitional area between worlds that Polly and Diggory get stuck in, and that under no circumstances must Jadis have control over. Because if she does, then she has control over the access to all the worlds. And Patristics, thank you. Brilliant name for a publisher. I think you guys are getting it. The publisher is the one who tells you which of the pools go to which place. So if you want to go to a publisher that's going to tell you which portals are going to take you to the world of story that you want, you come to the Wood Between the Worlds. So that's what the publisher name is going to be. This is a new fiction imprint. I'm going to be running it. The first book that's going to be published is my book, but we are also publishing 4 other authors. I can't announce them officially yet. There are no contracts signed, but some of them are quite big names, and I have hopes to attract even more in the future. And Seraphim, to answer your implicit question, submissions will be open from the start. Yes. What I'm interested in seeing is exactly what Seraphim was asking about. A place that is primarily, although not exclusively, for the kinds of writers that are writing the stories that Jonathan and Paul and Martin are talking about. So it will probably be, at least initially, mostly an Orthodox Christian imprint, because most of the people that I know who write books that are publishable and that I want to publish are Orthodox. But this is not going to be a Christian fiction imprint in the traditional sense of Christian fiction as it has become over the past 100 years or so. This is going to be an imprint that tells stories in the tradition, in the inheritance of the Inklings. So as I and Jonathan and Paul Kingsnorth and Catherine Hyde and Nicole Rokas try to teach the next generation of Inklings in St. Basil Writers Workshop, on the other end of it, we'll catch them and grab them and put their books into a new publishing house that is going to become, we hope, the go-to place for all of you lovely people who want that reading experience of those stories that don't come up very often. The stories that tell you a traditional, old-fashioned type of tale, but written for now. So this is exactly what the fantasy and sci-fi publishers right now are not doing. And they're going the exact opposite direction. As anybody who's looking at the recent releases in the bookstore knows, there is an imprimatur, an absolute imprimatur for well, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to belabor the point here. I've talked about it a lot before. Okay. So Sam Gutierrez in the chat says, I am an artist in school right now who's aiming to one day publish my own stories as comics or animation. What would your advice be for young artists to get their career started? My advice to you, young artists, would be, don't think about publishing, just write. But just writing is also not simply sitting and drawing or sitting and writing or putting books to paper. It means fill your creative well. Study, read outside of your genre. If you're somebody who writes graphic novels, go and read ancient Greek poetry. Like, read the classics. Read the things that have been passed down to us as the canon, the bearers of tradition, the things that have withstood the test of time and are considered by most people to be true examples of the good, of the true, and the beautiful. That's what I think all artists should do, whether or not they're publishing. And if you haven't published yet, you're getting ready to publish, don't worry about the publishing process until you've taken a lot of time and a lot of work to actually fill yourself with beautiful imagery, beautiful thoughts, and the beautiful work of people who have come before you. And then finish your first project, at which point you can start looking out. But don't even think about submitting until you've finished, because the chances are that you're going to have to go through a lot of revisions. You're going to have to go through a lot of editing. You have to go through a lot of difficult and unpleasant work to teach yourself the fundamentals of how to write stories properly before that story can become publishable. Angeline says, "Can I please submit?" Yes. As soon as all the website and everything is up, I will let you know. Actually, Angeline, I would love to see your story. I remember reading the first few chapters of it. I think it would be really cool. All right. Gosh, you guys are very active in the chat. That's great. Seraphim's asking, will you skeleton the cantos to the structure of an akathist or canon? Good question. You'll have to wait and see. I think it's not going to be as strict as the chiastic structure of an akathist, but there's definitely going to be a super a kind of substructure and a superstructure that's going to kind of make the narrative work on several levels. You'll have to wait and see. Patristic says, a name that instantly defines the kinds of stories that will come, which is what I'm going for. And I'll get to some other cool things that's going to come with the new press. But so, yeah. Novellas, yes. Short stories, novels, everything. I'm looking at all of it. And I'll tell you, Seraphim, how the short stories and novellas might immediately become relevant to this press in a second. All right. You guys are having a conversation, Sam and Nico. That's great. Simeon, hello. Good to see you. There's some, Seraphim says there's some interesting recent Russian animations like Serafino or the more simple Basso Profundo. Yeah, there's some beautiful stuff out there. Oh, Angeline, it's a new one about cats. Of course, it's about cats. Good. Excellent. All right. I'm going to take a quick second to make sure that there are no questions or comments inside the Patreon post, which would be unfortunate if I missed those, but it looks like everybody's using the live chat feature, which is great. Okay, so that's happening. Pending a few technical details, Wood Between Worlds Press is going to go live in February or March of 2024, at which point send them in, submit things. But we have plans to publish up to 6 books in the first year. Yes. So it's going to be fun. I'm really excited. And I hope you guys are as well. I've also had some really wonderful experiences of fruitfulness as a teacher, something I've always felt very strongly called to do. And in a way that has always fallen into my lap. I've never been the kind of person to kind of go out and like start telling people things that they should do. I've always avoided that, but I've always been asked, like pulled by my nose, which is quite large, and like go and tell people, like we need a teacher here, like move, like we need you over there right now, like go do that. That's always been the case ever since I got out of college, and it works that way, right? Because then you're not pushing your own self forward. But with the fruitfulness in this has been really great for me because I've had some really wonderful work with my coaching clients, which are my $100 a month patrons in the Waystone, in my Patreon community. We have some writers there that as soon as they get their novels finished, you guys are going to love their stories. There's some incredible stuff out there. And I get to work with these people. I get to like teach them the details of how to create characters. I get to gently nudge them here and there without being too much of a too pushy about it all. And it's just such a joy. I just have to say, it's such a joy. And those of you who are interested, I still have a few open slots at the $100 a month Patreon patronage level. And I am actually going to be in the new year opening it up, and it's already open. You can do it now if you want to. Doing coaching for people who don't want craft only, but also publishing help. So how do I publish a book? How do I set up an account on Amazon? How do I set up my author brand, my platform, that sort of thing? I'm going to be taking clients, people who have books that they want to publish and who want the specific help in how to set it up, especially for indie publishing. That's available. I have, I think, 4 slots right now. So if you want to get into that, please do. The availability is there, and I love my work with my clients. It's been really wonderful this past year. I've also had several new, finally, online courses that I've been promising people to do for ages. I have my old course, which is called The Art of Storytelling. I also have a new course that's called Motivate Your Lazy Characters, which was fun. I taught that in October, and I just launched a new course called Navigating the Choppy Waters of Publishing, which is a short mini course kind of surveying the current publishing landscape. I did this by researching some of the best voices and most knowledgeable people in publishing today, people like Dean Wesley Smith, Christine Catherine Rush, and Jane Friedman, and distilled their advice and their insight, because they have really profound insight into not where publishing is now, but also where it's going to go, and put it into a 4-lesson short course that also includes a wonderful conversation with Christopher Rocchio, who's a friend of mine and a fantastic writer, where he talks about his publishing journey, how he navigated the difficulties of having a publisher drop him in the middle of a series and finding a new publisher, and also how he's become a successful hybrid publisher using both traditional and indie principles to make himself a very successful and very effective writer of far future sci-fi. He's one of my favorite writers living today. So that course is available right now until December 11th for an early bird price. I'm going to put the website into the chat. I'm also I've also been sharing it with my newsletter subscribers. So if you're subscribed to my newsletter, you would have received one today that has a link to that as well. I'm also bundling all of the courses that I have right now for Christmas pricing, for kind of an early bird Christmas sale, which is ending on December 11th. And all of my courses are heavily discounted. This is the last time this is going to happen, because these courses I'm going to be retiring in 2024. So if you want to have access to those courses, you can go to the webpage, which I'm going to share right now. and you can see for yourself if that's something that would be interesting to you. I'm going to put that into the chat right now. And then I'm going to get back into the chat to see if there's more questions here. Gage Murphy is asking, is there a specific genre the press is looking for? It's going to be primarily speculative fiction, which for me is, fairy tale, fantasy, sci-fi, maybe even some horror, maybe magical realism, the stuff that isn't straight up realistic fiction, right? In other words, at this point, it's early days. I'd be very interested to see what people have available. And really, it's not like I'm more interested in the quality of the thing than how well it fits into a specific genre. But of course, we are writing in the tradition of the Inklings, so it should have some, not reference point to the Inklings, but it should be kind of written in that same tradition, if that makes sense. All right. Any more questions here before I move on? Of course I remember your story, Angeline. Are you kidding? That was great. And Seraphim, oh man, Seraphim. He has a longest short story he likes about a nun homesteading aliens and a scenting scent. That story, I love that story. I've read it. It's fantastic. I want it. Send it to me. It's sentient scent. It's supposed to be sentient scent, but never mind. Yes, Seraphim, I'm getting to the spread too thin bit. So right now I'm all positive, but I'm gonna get to the transition in a second. Right now there's nothing. So Gage, there's nothing about the press yet. So if you want to be one of the people who gets first access to that, sign up to my newsletter, nicholaskotar.com, front page. Just sign up, and you'll be the first to hear about it. So part of this fruitfulness thing is also that it's fallen into my lap, this opportunity to start a online community for writers. This is a Circle community. Circle, if you guys know, is a software that designs online communities in a way that allows you to go outside of the traditional social network structure. So it's a place that's safe, it's closed off, there's no opportunity for silly trolls to come in and bother you. It's behind a small paywall, and it's a wonderful place for writers to come together, to have accountability for their writing, to get opportunities to learn from each other, to network, and to learn from me. So what I've started to do, and the first one is happening tonight, 8 p.m. I'm starting a series of webinars for writers that are going to be, at this point, mostly geared towards the publishing process. I'm starting with the basics of your author platform tonight at 8 p.m. And these webinars are paid. They're $25 a pop. But if you are a member of the community, it's called the Story Hearth. I'll put the link into the chat as well, which is only $19.99 a month. You get access to the webinar as well as all the other features of the community. So it's actually cheaper to become a member than it is to buy the webinars individually. Eventually, these webinars will be a comprehensive library of the current best practices of how to publish independently. That's what I'm going for. So this is a good opportunity to join right now, because if you want to buy my courses, you get access to the Story Hearth for free for the first 3 months as part of your purchase, even if you're purchasing at the lowest level, at the cheapest level. So another opportunity to hang out with me and some other wonderful writers. We're just starting. It's a pretty new community, and it's an opportunity to really get to know a small group of people well. We have some really decent writers there, and just some lovely and wonderful people. So that's all of that has been the stuff that's been happening. Talk about fruitfulness. There is a lot of stuff going on. Now, the downside of fruitfulness is the following. If you're fruitful without boundaries, you get cancer. Like, that's what it is, right? Too much growth without the proper limits. Too much growth of anything is never healthy. So Seraphim was very correct in noting the fact that he has sensed, quite correctly, from my presence or lack thereof in the Patreon community, on social, and in other places where I show up online, that this fruitfulness thing has taken it out of me big time. I've been doing way too many things. I've been doing way too many things. I've been putting out too many fruits. And what happens? Things become shallow. I become scraped or like butter over too much bread. I am totally Bilbo with the ring on. There it is. Oh dear. You can still see me. And there are consequences to this. The stuff that I'm putting out is not good. It's not good. There's the quality of my work has suffered. The quality of my ability to interact with people has suffered. So there needs to be a different way of approaching this. Fruitfulness is the word for 2023. Add to that, there have been some very serious personal and professional disasters that have happened outside of my control over the past calendar year, which of course people just have to expect that they're going to happen. You will always have things that go wrong. You cannot anticipate that everything will be perfect. It's one of those inherent problems that we humans have. We plan for the perfect future and it never happens, and we get upset when it doesn't. At least I do. So one of the downsides of this is that it's shown me, it's not a downside, it's an upside. All of this is an upside. It's shown me the limits of what I can do and what I can do well. It's also led me to an unexpected surprise, because in the process of being fruitful over the past year, it's become apparent to me that though I started the year with a kind of excitement for the possibility or potential of this venture, the storytelling business of mine, to become at some point in the future the thing that I do professionally, like the job that I do, it's happened. I am now and have been now for a while, a full-time creative professional. I am now fully supported financially by my creative work, which was, those of you who are watching from the outside might think, duh. But it like dawned on me just recently. I am a full-time creative professional. And as such, I have to act like a professional. And how do professionals act? Well, they professionalize their business. They don't do the things that I've been doing. They don't spread themselves too thin. They don't jump around and latch on to the latest and most exciting thing just because it's shiny. Magpie syndrome, anybody? So that's what the theme for 2024 is: professionalization. That means I'm going to be cutting down some things that I do and putting a lot of attention to a smaller number of things. Seraphim, your question is apt. How on earth does that fit with the founding of a new imprint? Well, actually, it works quite well. Now, the imprint that I'm founding, with the help of St. Athanasius College, by the way, who are funding this venture, I'm rolling in a lot of the things that I've been doing for my own business into this new publishing venture and continuing it, but just not for myself and for other authors, because I do think that there's a huge future for this kind of publishing venture. So I do have a podcast called Fantasy for Our Time, where I talk about fantasy media. Last year, it was quite popular because we talked about The Rings of Power with Richard Brolin. Yeah. Well, that is going to be part of the public-facing side of Wood Between Worlds Press. I'm starting early in 2024 a Substack that's going to have a podcast attached to it. This is going to be called The Wood Between the Worlds, and it's going to be our version of Tor.com. Those of you who are in the fantasy world know that Tor.com, not Tor, but Tor.com as a separate brand, is an absolutely brilliant website because they publish original fiction, but they also feature really interesting, popular, and sometimes quite profound blog content about the stories, not simply stories. So they do both well. They do both the talking about the stories and the stories themselves really well. And some of the things that have come through Tor.com have been really, really good. And even though Tor is going very left in the progressive scale, and most of the stories they publish these days are almost unpalatable to me, still, the way that they do this is really inspiring to me. So we're going to have a place, basically a social network. Because if you've been paying attention to how well Paul Kingsnorth and Martin Shaw both have been using Substack, it's a safe space where people can go and actually interact with each other, not simply with the content. It's not like Facebook because it's not governed by an algorithm from the outside. It's basically a community that has some really nice functionality within itself for the people who are members of it. So I'm really excited about this as part of the outward facing strategy for Wood Between Worlds Press. And it's going to be an opportunity for you guys to encounter both the stories and the thinking about stories that people like me, Jonathan, Paul Kingsnorth, and others have been engaging in. And of course, Richard Rowland will be there as well. Father David says, one element for coping strategy, mead, not only drinking, which is pleasant in and of itself, but also brewing, whole different kind of creativity. Well, most of my time is outside of writing. The creativity that I've been indulging in is the creativity of the adventure race, which for me is wonderful because it involves my body, but also involves my mind in the constant need to orient myself on a map. So maybe at some point I'll get to brewing, but at this point, all of my time is pretty much stuck in training. Patristix is actually asking about any film adaptations in the works. My only existing and current option with Hollywood recently expired. So at this point, there is nothing happening. But that door is not fully shut. One of the reasons why it expired is because of the writer's strike, which has recently been resolved, and also because any property that has anything to do with anything Slavic, Russian, Ukrainian, it doesn't matter. Is right now nobody wants to touch it in Hollywood. So at this point, more stewing than brewing. Yes, Seraphim, absolutely. All right. So with all that, here's where I talk about 2024 and the things that you have to look forward to. Basically, I'm putting a lot of my attention into the places that fuel me the most and therefore can produce the best kind of work that can then get your attention. Because if I'm not producing good work, you're not going to be around, and you shouldn't be around. So what does that mean? That means that I am renewing my commitment to both my Patreon community of readers and the Story Hearth for writers. Those two spaces are where the really insider stuff happens. And in the Patreon community, the things that are going to be the most prominent are the book club and In a Certain Land, my new fairy tale podcast. Now, one of the reasons why one of the ways that the being spread too thin, the being butter scraped over too much bread has manifested itself, is that I launched the podcast using a seemingly well-made integration between Patreon and Acast, which is a company that distributes podcasts throughout the world. It's supposed to be a really good company. The integration stinks. It's really bad. And so as a result, the podcast simply isn't being featured by any podcast aggregators. It appears in Apple, it appears in Google, but there are no episodes. It doesn't play. And the thing is, like, I've been on hours with support and they have no idea what's going on. So this is not a good setup. I kind of rushed into it because I wanted to get this thing off the ground and I knew people want to hear the stories. It didn't work. So what does that mean? That means that for the foreseeable future, which means in the next 2 months or so, all new episodes of In a Certain Land will be only posted inside my Patreon community. However, they will all be public, so you will not have to be a paid patron to be able to listen to the stories. You will have to have the Patreon app, or you need to be able to use private RSS feeds inside your podcast catchers. So if you didn't understand what that meant, you can message me individually and I can explain. It's a little bit complicated, but it's very easy once you figured out how to set it up on your favorite podcast player. All this means, though, is that you will not be able to subscribe to In a Certain Land using Apple or Spotify, and it won't automatically upload new episodes for now. I am meeting with a specialist later next week to set up a different podcast distribution mechanism. I'm not rushing it. I'm going to make sure everything's in place, and I'm going to do a second public launch early in the new year once I have a series of episodes ready to go, and once I'm confident that the distribution system actually works. So this is one of the side effects of leaving Ancient Faith Media. They had all that stuff set up really well because that's what they do. I don't, but I want to get into it. I think it's an important thing. People love the stories, and I'm really starting to get into them much more deeply than I did before. So that's going to happen. The public distribution of it's going to happen later early in 2024. For now, new podcasts will be published, at least one, possibly two a month for the next few months, but only on my Patreon community. Again, those are free. Those are all you have to do is join the Patreon community as a free member. Or of course, you can join as a paid member. I wouldn't complain. As I mentioned, Fantasy for Our Time is going to transition into the Wood Between the Worlds podcast. We're going to have the same kind of content, but we're going to have more guests, and we're going to talk about a more wide distribution of fantasy media. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very excited about it. Patristics is asking about a complete Raven Sun Saga book. That's the next thing I want to talk about. So the book club inside my Patreon community, which we call the Good Books for Great Lives book club, because, as a Russian, I like to be subtle. Yeah. We are reading through the entire Raven Sun series. We're currently at book 3. If you'd like to join, by the way, the book club, I'm giving out free audiobook codes for everybody who joins up. So you just let me know, and I'll send that to you. As we go through it, and as I'm rereading the story for the first time in a while, I'm realizing there's a lot of stories that in between the novels that have yet to be told. Little short stories, fairy tales, snippets, scenes, like deleted stuff, right? The kind of stuff you would get in a special edition DVD, right? I want to write those stories. Like, they're bubbling up inside me. And as soon as this year is finished, I have a few translation projects that I need to get through before we go on vacation for the winter. I really want to write those stories, but I want you to have them as well. And I thought it would be a cool thing to kind of create a book club edition of the complete Raven Sun series that includes never before published short stories that happen to the characters of the Raven Sun series in between the published novels. The cover for that has been done, and I've shared it online. It's a gorgeous cover. It has a siren in flight. This was digitally created by my cover designer, the same cover designer that did all the rest of the books. I'm really excited about this. I was hoping to get it done for Christmas, and then the butter scraped over too much bread thing happened, and I'm like, I'm not going to push it. I'm going to let this thing happen. So as we read the Raven Sun series in the book club, I'm going to be writing those stories. We'll probably be done with the Raven Sun series sometime in May or June of 2024, because we're not reading it straight through. We're interspersing it with other books, including, by the way, Eugene Vodolaskin's latest, which is going to be our next book. Those of you who are interested in reading Vodolaskin with me, come on over. The History of the Island, that's the one I'm going to read. And so by the time we finish in the book club, I'm going to have written all of the short stories. I'm going to format that. I'm going to prepare it. And then all Patreon supporters are going to get that book at cost. So I'm not going to be making money off of it if you are a patron. All I'm going to ask you to pay for is the cost of printing the book and the cost of shipping. Maybe if things go really well, I'm not promising this, but if by May or June things are really good, financially speaking, I might even send out a few, maybe all of those copies for free to people who want them. I will also then make it publicly available for sale. If you are not a member of my Patreon community, you can get them at regular cost on a new online store that's going to be connected to the Wood Between the Worlds, where you will be able to buy the books directly from us, which is going to be really good for the authors, because it's going to mean they're going to get the biggest slice of the pie. So that's also a really exciting development coming next year. Seraphim's asking, any thoughts on including a Clark World style feature where select short stories that are audio friendly are read on air podcasts with a few sound effects and music? I'm open to the idea. I don't think that'll happen next year. That being said, there is someone who's doing that. It's called Finding Fantasy Reads. She's an author named Corinne Norton. She's really good. and she recently read one of my short stories set in the Raven Sun universe called The Healer and the Beast. Go check it out. It's really well done. So there are venues that are doing this. I think that's a good idea for the future, Seraphim. Probably not next year, though. Being butter and being scraped over too much bread and all that. In addition, I've got audiobooks ready to go. I haven't set them up yet. I'm going to sell them next year for my entire world building series. This is the series of nonfiction books that explore the history, folklore, and fairy tales behind the Raven Sun series. Those audiobooks will be on sale in 2024. I also have In a Certain Land, Volume 3 of my collected translations of Russian fairy tales. This one is based on Season 3 of In a Certain Kingdom. That's going to be available in early 2024 as well. And then I'm going to bundle the books either as 3 individual paperbacks in a box set, or as a single omnibus with all three books in a single bound volume, both paperback and hardcover. And at the end of the year, I'm going to be preparing for my Christmas Kickstarter, like I did last year, a definitive illustrated collection of Russian fairy tales translated by moi. I am going to be I'm very excited about this. I haven't decided whether it's going to be illustrated by new illustrators or it's going to be a collection of classic Russian folk art in very high quality. I'm open to suggestion on that question, and we'll see how that goes. But that's going to be a big Kickstarter for Christmas of 2024. Christmas 2024. Short stories inside Patreon are continuing. They've been on a slight hiatus, but they will be continuing next year. And at some point in 2024, I will also release Volume 2 in Children of Vasilia, the new series set in the world of Raven Sun, of which The Son of the Deathless was book 1, as it turned out. Initially, I thought Son of the Deathless was a standalone in between 2 series. Turns out, no. The characters told me, we are book 1. You have to continue our story, which I'm going to do. And I'm very excited about that one. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but I will tell you that a binge watch of Clone Wars is going to be a big part of this, which, take that or leave it. I'm really excited about watching all that again. I love the Clone Wars. Well, that's that. What that means, practically speaking, is that for the rest of December and all of January, you're going to be hearing a lot less of me. This is me doing what I told one of you to do, filling the well, reading a lot, finishing some long outstanding projects, taking care of some personal business, and possibly even traveling over Christmas with my family over to Europe on a long delayed family trip to go visit family over in the old country. So a lot of stuff will be happening in 2024. For it to happen properly, you're all going to need to give me a bit of a break in December and January. But if you want to help, tell people who are writers about the Christmas sale for my writers courses and the Story Hearth, because every dollar that I get from the sales of those courses are going to go to helping me fund these next few months, and are going to go a long way to helping me put the right foundation for 2024 and make sure that we start the new press on the right foot. I'm really excited. I'm really happy about the things that are happening. Yes, Father David, yes. The old country is, may God protect me. We'll see how it goes, but that's the plan at this point anyway. So if you have any more questions, go drop them in the chat. I'll be here for a few more minutes before I have to go and run. Those of you who came late, don't forget that I have the first of my several paid writers webinars happening tonight at 8 p.m. This one is on everything you need to know about author platform for absolute beginners. It's going to be a fun one. And there'll be, again, like I mentioned, this is going to be a series of webinars that will become a webinar library that is going to be a go-to resource for anybody who wants to publish independently. And that webinar library will be exclusively available inside the Story Hearth, which is my writers online community. Go and check it out. I will once again share those links in the chat for those who are interested. And while I do that, ask your questions if you like, and if not, I'm going to go say goodnight and going to go take care of. I'm going to go follow Father David's advice, and I'm going to go mead up as I prepare for tonight's webinar. right. There it is. I'm going to go check out. Angeline, you're welcome and thank you. Make sure I haven't missed anything within inside Patreon. Good, no comments there. Excellent. No, I'm not busy in the first weeks of December. The first 3 weeks of December, Nick, I am available for all my one-on-ones. So I'm trying to get those all done within the first few weeks so I can have Christmas off. So don't worry, we're still on for December. I promised you that. Can't wait to go over your stuff with you. Where to find stories of saints and church fathers? That's an interesting question, Ian. You know what? There are a few sources that I would immediately send you to. Seraphim, good evening. Good to see you as always. So Ian, one of the greatest places to begin is the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Benedict Ward has a really nice collection of these. These are a lot of that is instructions of monks, but they come in the form of stories about the monks. They're really wonderful. If you want to go even deeper, the Lazaic history, which I think in English is called the Evergetinos, so it's Greek. Getinos. I think it's called that. I just put it in the chat. Those stories are incredible. They're fantastic. That being said, pay attention to Paul Kingsnorth and Martin Shaw. They're starting to tell saint stories in their particular styles. Paul just had a wonderful saint's life that he retold. I think it was St. Paul of Thebes, which is one of the desert saints of Egypt. He did a fantastic job, and it's really beautifully written. I think those two guys are going to be doing some wonderful things with. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. Well, I suppose I'm going to leave that off. Yeah, not yet. I'm going to leave it as a teaser. But yeah. So that's where I would start. Yeah. Patricia 6, what are your favorite Christmas traditions? My favorite Christmas tradition, my all-time favorite Christmas tradition is making beef Wellington on Christmas Day. I love making beef Wellington on Christmas Day. But I suppose I should have said something like going to church, which, like those things are like absolutely assumed. The church services on Christmas are wonderful. They're not as great as Lent and Easter and Pascha, of course, but the vigil service for Christmas, I love it in the monastery. It's long. There's a lot of beautiful music that we sing only once a year. It's nuts. The boys are all juiced up. They're like really excited. It's awesome. I love it. But yeah, beef Wellingtons on Christmas Day. Yeah. Brittany, is it wrong that you listen to us about baking Prospera? No, it's absolutely fine. Father David says for Saint Dmitry of Rostov's collection and the prologue. The prologue is good too. Yeah, Saint Dmitry of Rostov, it's good. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. I'm not sure where you could buy that these days, but those are sold by month. The collection by their Lives of Saints given on every single day. Post liturgical naps. Someday I will return to those, Seraphim, but I have 4 children, 2 of whom are under the age of 5, so they don't exist. These post liturgical naps, not for me. I wish they did someday. No, awesome. Okay. Let's see if there's any questions over on Facebook. The Great Collection is now published by St. Herman, says Father David. Excellent. When did you introduce your kids to fantasy literature? Asks Lucas. I started to read the Chronicles of Narnia to my kids when my eldest was about 5. And then he took over himself when we got to about The Magician's Nephew. And after that, he devoured the Chronicles of Prydain. And he and I kind of together read The Hobbit. I would read parts of it, then he would read parts of it. He started to read, he's 9 right now. Last year he started to read Lord of the Rings. Didn't get very far. He's into Hardy Boys, which I understand. I was into Hardy Boys too. So I think, 4 or 5 is probably good. But, reading to them, the good old stories. Good audience today. Thank you everybody for coming. Your questions are great. Your involvement, as always, is highly appreciated. I like to talk to you people. You guys are good people. Why fairy tales? I'd imagine they have a great source in you. Oh, what about well, I start reading fairy tales to the kids when they're like 2, as soon as they can understand what I'm talking about. Because the fairy tales, the language is so simple in the really good ones, right? That you don't have to be like kids that are very young that don't like, they just love the cadence of it. Even if they're not really paying attention all that much, they love it. Like my 2-year-old, well, he's more like a 3-year-old. He's really advanced. It's what happens when you're sick a lot when you're a kid. You grow up very fast. He's 2 years old. He can sit in front of the fire for a long time listening to me tell the story. He doesn't understand much of it, I'm sure, but just the rhythm of it, the images that come out of it kind of bubble out. I remember as a kid, like as a small child, like 3 or 4, my mother reading these stories to me, my grandmother reading these stories to me. And those images that were formed in my mind were so vivid. I still remember them. I still remember the books, like the covers and the pictures and things. It's amazing what kids can take. They're really smart kiddies. Watership Down, that's a great one. I'm not sure, like it's quite traumatic for children to read Watership Down. I'm not sure that I would let my kid read it until he's about 12 or 13. Nick says, I recently found Patrick Curry and he explains enchantment really well. I like Patrick Curry. Yeah. Tolkien says fairy is enchantment and Patrick says enchantment is something like falling in love. So that means that elves live in the land of falling in love. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah, Patrick Curry is cool. He's an interesting critic. I enjoy his work. In fact, it was Patrick Curry's collection of Tolkien essays that I was reading in Amsterdam airport the day that I started to write the Song of the Siren. Something about those essays did something in my brain. So yeah, I'm a fan. All right, lovely people. I think I'm gonna have to call it a day. It's been over an hour, and I need to save my voice for the evening and for the weekend's festivities. There are always festivities in the weekend. And thank you all for coming. It's lovely to see this active group here. And yeah, tell people about all the stuff that's happening. Let them know about the courses, about the online community. Join yourself if you like. Always happy to see more people there. And those of you who are really serious and really want to get serious about your work, I do have those $100 a month slots available in Patreon if that's something that you're interested in. Meantime, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. Some of you, actually, I think it's early morning, isn't it, in Australia? Patristics, good job. We have people from all over the world here today. It's pretty impressive. Thanks, everybody. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to serving you all with story in 2024. Talk to you soon.